This is chapter 5. We'll be talking about the tissues of the human body. So we had already talked about the organization of the body. You start off with atoms and it goes up to cells. Those cells get together to create tissues, which is where we are. So in complex organisms, cells are organized into tissues. A tissue is a group of similar cells with a common function. So if you're going to study tissues, then you are going into a field called histology. Histo meaning tissue, and of course, ology meaning the study of. There are four major types of tissues in the body. So as you are studying these are basically going to be the four tissue types that create all of the tissues in the human body. You have epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue. Each of these four will have different functions. They'll be located in different places throughout the body. Of course, similar types of tissues will be located in similar types of locations. So keep that in mind as you're studying these. For those of you who are visual learners, you may want to use this type of graph in order to visualize and understand the differences between the four different types of tissues. So let's talk about epithelial tissue briefly. Epithelial tissues are going to be your protectors. Those are going to be where your secretions occur. You will be able to absorb things. You'll be able to excrete things. These are found in surfaces that cover the body. All right. So like your skin, but not just your outer surface, it also will line the internal organs. So on the outsides and the insides of your internal organs, you'll likely find these epithelial tissues. These are also what makes up your glands. So those glands that secrete substances like hormones, sweat glands, etc. These are going to be made up of some type of epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissues lack blood vessels, so they are avascular. Remember, anytime you have a in front of a word, it means without. So avascular, the cells readily divide. So they're going to always divide to create more of themselves. They are relatively fast dividing or fast replicating, and these cells are tightly packed. Think about your skin. You don't have any gaps. These cells are really close together to provide that protection so that when it rains, for example, water doesn't go into your body and make you waterlogged. So anytime you see epithelial tissues on a surface, these will be the characteristics that you have. Avascular, cells readily divide, and the cells are going to be tightly packed. The next type of tissue we see is connective tissue. Connective tissue is a tissue that connects. So when it says binds, that's what it means. It brings other types of tissues together. It's supportive. You'll find connective tissue underneath or in between different types of tissue to help support it. Connective tissues are protective. They fill spaces. Your fat storage, your adipose tissue, is a type of connective tissue. And then it produces blood cells. So your the process of creating blood cells are occur because of connective tissue. Connective tissues are very widely distributed throughout the body. It is actually it is the most widely distributed type of tissue in the body. It's also going to be the most varied. So when we get into connective tissues a little bit more, we'll talk about the variations, but know that connective tissues are going to be the most widely distributed. So you're going to see it in the most places. and it's going to be the most varied. Connective tissues, unlike epithelial tissues, mostly have very good blood supplies. So for most connective tissue, the blood supply leading to it is going to be very good, unlike epithelial tissues, which are avascular. Connective tissue cells are farther apart than epithelial tissues. So when we talked about epithelial tissues, we mentioned that these cells are protective. They are on surfaces, so the cells are very, very closely packed together. Connective tissues don't have that same type of protection job, so they don't have to be as tightly packed. They can be further apart, and they have extracellular matrix in between the cells. So remember that matrix refers to the stuff that surrounds the cell, especially when you're talking about extracellular matrix. That is the stuff that is surrounding the cells. When we talked about interstitial fluid, that is a type of extracellular matrix. Plasma in the blood is a type of extracellular matrix because these are going to be the fluids or the substances outside of those cells. The third type of tissue is muscle cells or muscle tissues. These are all about movement. You have muscle that attaches to bones. You have muscles that are in the walls of hollow organs like your stomach and your heart. Yeah, that are in the walls of the hollow organs like the stomach, the heart, the blood vessels. Muscle tissue is able to contract in response to a specific stimulus. So the muscle tissue gets the signal, and that signal basically tells it to contract. And from that contraction, there is some type of movement, whether it is a skeletal muscle that allows our body parts to move, or it is a muscle inside of a blood vessel that helps that blood vessel contract to help the blood move, to help it continue to move along in the bloodstream. The final type of final type of tissue is the nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is responsible for conducting impulses for things like coordination, regulation of body functions, integration of different signals and responses to those signals. And it's responsible for sensory reception, meaning I'm able to receive information about what's going on in my internal and external environments so that if necessary, my body can do something about it. Nervous tissue is located in the brain, it's located in the spinal cord, and it is also consistent of the nerves that are found throughout the rest of the body outside of the brain and the spinal cord. The characteristics of nervous tissue is that these cells communicate with each other and other body parts. So in order to have anything happen, in order for me to speak right now, in order for my muscles to move, to make the sound, my nerve cells have to communicate with each other, but then they also have to communicate with the muscles, with the skin, with my connective tissue, etc., so that I can do all the things that I mentioned. Intercellular junctions. So intercellular junctions are how these cells are connected to one another. You have three different types of intercellular junctions. You have tight junctions, desmosomes, and gap junctions. So just looking at the names of, say, tight junctions and gap junctions. A junction is a place where two things come together. So a tight junction will be, just from looking at the name, you can see that these are going to be where cells are very, very close together, like extremely close. In this particular case, the cell membranes are going to be fused together. So they're going to be really, really tightly packed. Examples of these tight junctions are going to be the cells that make up the small intestine. So once food goes from your mouth, continues down the digestive system, and they go into your small intestine, those cells won't have, are not going to be able to come apart because they are so tight together. You have gap junctions that are sort of the opposite. These are going to be cells that are fused together, but they're going to have holes or tunnels or channels between the cells. So these tubular channels are going to allow these cells that are connected to exchange substances. So think of it like little holes in between the walls so that one cell can share with the adjacent cell. Muscle cells of the heart and cells of the digestive tract are those that have gap junctions. The third type are desmosomes, and we'll see soon an image of what a desmosome looks like, but basically it's going to be like having a spot weld. So think about a welder taking a big bolt and driving it into two pieces of sheet metal that you want to come together. So you have these big bolts on the sheet metals. Those are going to be the spot welds that hold those membranes or cell membranes together. So here you see the three different types of intercellular junctions. So here you have your tight junctions. Look at it. It's sort of like you have these membranes sewn together really, really tightly so that they're fixed. They're not going anywhere. Then you have desmosomes. Desmosomes, again, are like your spot weld. So you have one here, you'll have one here, you'll have one here, and these are going to be how these cells are put together. And then finally, you have your gap junctions that have your tubular channels or tunnels between cells so that this cell can share substances with this cell or vice versa. So this is just a little bit of information to help you understand how tissues come together and how technology is working with these tissues. Go ahead and read that on your own. If you have any questions about the nanotechnology and how it works with the blood-brain barrier, let's talk about it in class. All right. So that first type of tissue was epithelial tissue. And we already talked about the general characteristics of them, but I'll go over them again. They cover organs and body surfaces. So when we say body surfaces, we're talking about the outside surface of the body, of course, the skin. That is the largest organ we have, and that is the largest body surface we have, is the outside of our body. But it's also covering internal body surfaces. So you're talking about inside of your cavities. Those are body surfaces. Inside of your system, so lining your digestive system. All of those are going to be covered by epithelial tissues. Again, it also makes up glands. So those glandular cells, those tissues that produce your hormones, those that produce things like sweat and oil on your skin, all of those are types of glands, and those are all going to be made from types of epithelial tissues. One characteristic of epithelial tissue is that there is a free surface on the outside, meaning one of the surfaces of the epithelial tissue is not going to be connected to another cell. Rather, it's going to be open to something, to some space. Like, let's say, the inside of the digestive system. So you have this long tube that runs from your mouth to your anus. And in the middle of the tube is just space. Well, open to one end to open to that space is the free surface of the epithelial cells. On the other side of that cell is what's called a basement membrane. It's basically the membrane that all of those cells are attached to. So epithelial cells have a free surface and a basement membrane on the inside. Epithelial tissues lack blood vessels, so these cells and these tissues are going to be avascular, which means that they're not going to be able to get their own nutrients. What needs to happen is nutrients will have to diffuse from other nearby tissue, especially the connective tissue that is deep to it, that is supporting it, etc. So, avascular, nutrients have to diffuse from connective tissue because it's avascular and can't get its own nutrients. These cells divide rapidly. This is why when you cut your skin, you heal within a couple days. You may even heal by the end of that day, depending on how shallow the cut was. But because these cells divide so rapidly, your injuries will tend to heal more rapidly. Epithelial tissues are classified according to two different classifications. They're classified according to the cell shape, and they're classified according to the number of cell layers. And when you're talking about epithelial tissue, you want to you need to use both of these layers or both of these classifications in order to name the type of epithelial tissue that we're referring to. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but keep in mind that when you're referring to epithelial tissue, you have to refer to both the cell shape as well as the number of layers. So let's talk about the cell shapes. You have three main cell shapes. You have squamous cells, cells that are flat. You have cuboidal cells, cells that are shaped like a cube. And you have columnar cells, cells that are tall, like columns. So your squamous cells, I've heard it called or described as looking like fried eggs. So if you had a bunch of eggs that you cracked open on a skillet and you just put them side by side without scrambling them and just let them cook, that is what a squamous cell looks like. And again, we'll see another picture soon, but keep that in mind that that's what a squamous cell looks like, flat. Cuboidal cells are cells that are roughly the same size on either side of the cube. And then your columnar cells are going to be taller than they are wide. So you'll have one tall end and one direction. They won't be as big or as tall as the length of it. Looking at the layers of these cells are going to be either one cell layer thick or more than one cell layer thick. So if these cells are one cell layer thick, then they are referred to as simple. Simple. Simple means only one layer of cells. Then you have stratified. Cells that have more than one layer, regardless how many layers it is, whether it's 2 or 200, they're called stratified. Now, if a layer of cells looks like there's more than one layer, but it's actually one layer, then it's pseudo-stratified. Remember, stratified means more than one layer, but pseudo means false or fake. So if you have a layer of cells that looks like more than one, that looks like more than one layer, but it is actually only one layer, that is pseudo-stratified. All right. Now let's talk about these different cells with these different characteristics. Simple squamous and simple cuboidal epithelia. Remember, simple means one cell layer. Squamous means flattened cells. Cuboidal means cube-shaped cells. So simple squamous epithelium, you'll have a single layer of thin, flat cells. Again, this is the name, this is what the name of it is telling you. So this single layer is simple. Squamous is the thin, flat cells part. Substances are able to pass through easily through these simple squamous cells because they are one cell layer and they are thin. For example, the cells that make up the smallest unit of your lungs, the air sacs, also known as alveoli, are simple squamous epithelium. This is why it's easy for your for oxygen and carbon dioxide to pass from one side of the air sacs to the other because it's only one layer of thin flat cells. The capillaries, the smallest blood vessels, are also simple squamous epithelium, again, meaning they're one layer of thin flat cells, which is what allows your capillaries to do all of the exchange from your body tissues to your bloodstream. Simple squamous epithelium is thin and delicate. It can be easily damaged. As you can imagine, if you have a thin single layer of cells, then they can be damaged very easily. But luckily, these epithelial cells repair quickly because they divide quickly. Remember, we talked about earlier how they divide quickly. So they're easily damaged, but they also divide and replicate fairly quickly. Simple squamous epithelium is found in your diffusion and filtration sites. So anywhere in your body where you have substances that diffuse from one place to another, or you have a location where substances need to be filtered, you'll find simple squamous epithelium there. It also lines blood vessels and lymphatic vessels. So these are going to be the vessels that are responsible for moving your blood and your lymphatic fluid throughout your body. Those are going to be lined, those vessels are going to be lined in simple squamous epithelium. Now, your simple cuboidal epithelium. Again, these are a single layer of cube-shaped cells. Simple cuboidal epithelium is responsible for secretion and absorption. Remember that we said that these are going to be found in glands. Glands secrete things. So the cells that are responsible for secreting things are likely going to be simple cuboidal epithelium. These are also going to be the cells responsible for some of your absorption in the body. Examples of where you'll find simple cuboidal epithelium: you'll find them lining the kidney tubules. You'll find them in the thyroid, in the follicles of the thyroid, and you'll find them in the ducts of some other glands like your sweat glands. These are also going to be the cells that cover the ovaries. So simple squamous, single layer of thin flat cells, simple cuboidal, single layer of cube-shaped cells. So remember I said that simple squamous looks like a bunch of fried eggs. At least that's one of the ways I've heard it described. If you look at this image, this looks like a bunch of eggs were cracked open on a skillet side by side, and they were just allowed to sit there. Those are actually your simple squamous cells. So if we were to look at, if we were to take the eggs that we just cracked on the skillet and stand directly over it, this is what we'll see. This is what we'll see. So we're looking down on the skillet with all the eggs cracked on the inside. But if we were to take and slice those eggs and then pick it up and look at it from the side, this is what we'll see. So you see how it's really, really flat here. That nucleus that was in the middle of these cells, it's still in the middle, but it looks more flattened, whereas from the top it looked round. That is your simple squamous epithelium. All right, both of these images are simple squamous epithelium. You're just looking at them from two different perspectives. Then you have your simple cuboidal. So your cube shells, cube-shaped cells roughly have the same size on all sides of the cell, which means that your nucleus then is going to be directly in the middle, just kind of sitting and directly in the middle of that cube. Here is an image of the actual gland. So you see how it's cut at a cross section. So you're seeing the roundness of that gland and you see the lumen. Lumen is the inner surface or the inner space of a structure. So when you look at that lumen, you see that that lumen is an empty space. Remember, I also said that your epithelial cells will have a free surface, and then on the other side, it'll be attached to a basement membrane. So in the simple cuboidal cells, this is the free surface, and this is the surface where the basement membrane is. If you go and look at the drawing, this side is the free surface. This here is what the side that is attached to the basement membrane. In your simple squamous, this would be the free surface. This would be the basement membrane. Now, let's look at simple columnar and pseudostratified columnar epithelia. Simple columnar, again, you have a single layer of elongated cells. So a column is a long, thin structure. They're elongated, but they're not as wide as they are long. In most simple columnar epithelia, you'll find that the nuclei are usually around the same level, and that'll be close to the basement membrane of those cells, which is near where that cell is connected to the structure that it's covering. So nuclei usually at the same level, and that's going to be near the basement membrane. Sometimes your simple columnar epithelium will have other structures on them, like microvilli or cilia. Microvilli and cilia are both finger-like projections on the free surface of the cell. They're going to be similar, but they're going to be slightly different. Just know that both of them are finger-like projections on the free surface, even though they will have slightly different structures. Simple columnar epithelium is also associated with goblet cells. Goblet cells are going to be single cell glands that secrete mucus. These goblet cells will be embedded in between simple columnar epithelial cells, and they're going to secrete mucus. Remember that these cells are going to be lining surfaces like digestive system, like your nasal passages. And these are going to be surfaces that are open to the outside, and they're going to have a lot of movement in and out of those structures. So the goblet cell is secreting mucus to help to protect those cells so that they are not getting infected, so that they don't get dried out, so that they're able to do what they need to do. Simple columnar epithelial cells are responsible for secretion and absorption. And example of where you find these cells is lining the uterus, lining the stomach, and lining the intestines. The next cell is your pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. Remember, pseudo means false, and stratified means more than one layer. So these are going to be the cells that look like more than one layer, but it's actually a single layer. When I said, we were talking about the simple columnar epithelium, I mentioned that the nuclei of these cells are generally going to be found at the same level in all of these cells, and that's going to be near the basement membrane. Well, when you look at the pseudostratified epithelium, columnar epithelium, these are not going to look like that. These cells are going to have nuclei that are going to be located in more than one level. So they're not just going to be near the basement membrane. Because these nuclei are at more than one level, it appears that you have more than one layer of cells. That's where the pseudostratified part comes from, because it looks like it's more than one layer, but in actuality, the nuclei are at different levels, but it's still all one layer of cells that are all connected to the same basement membrane. These two will oftentimes have cilia, so those finger-like projections on the free surface of the cell. And they'll be associated with goblet cells. Goblet cells are going to secrete mucus to help protect the cells and the structures. The pseudostratified columnar epithelium has a job of protection from infection. These cells are going to be found in places like the respiratory passageways. So at this top image, you notice how, again, you have your free surface here. So this is going to be the part of the cell that is going to be in some lumen, some space where something is happening. So in the respiratory system, this is going to be where air passes through. And you see like the little fuzziness at the top of it, that's going to be your cilia or microvilli, those finger-like projections on that free surface. On the other end of these cells are connected to a basement membrane. So this side is free, this side is connected to a basement membrane. Those are two, what's the word? Those are two characteristic findings of epithelial cells. Free surface, basement membrane. You notice here how all of these nuclei are roughly at the same level near the basement membrane. That is characteristic of simple columnar epithelium. If you look at this image on the right, you will see all of these nuclei roughly at the same level all the way around this structure. You have a fuzziness at one end at the free surface of these cells. These cells are bound on the other end at a basement membrane. Here you see a goblet cell. Remember, the goblet cell is going to be the cell that produces mucus. So this cell is going to produce and secrete mucus onto this surface to help protect it from damage, from infection, etc. The picture at the bottom is your pseudostratified columnar epithelium. So microvilli or cilia at the free surface. This is going to be your free surface near a lumen of some sort. You have your goblet cells producing mucus that's going to be secreted onto that surface. You have the basement membrane on the other end that anchors and holds the cells in place. Then you have these blue dots, which are the nuclei. And you notice how they're not all at the same level. Some are near the basement membrane, some are just above that, and some are toward the top. The thing is that all of these cells can be traced back down to this basement membrane. So all of these are one layer, pseudo-stratified columnar epithelium. All right, let's start talking about the stratified. So we started talking about the simple cells, simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, and then the pseudo-stratified columnar. All are cells with one cell layer thick. Stratified cells are going to be two or more layers. Anything above one layer is considered stratified. So stratified squamous, these are going to be many cell layers of thin cells, right? That squamous is that thin flat cell. This is also going to be a protective layer. Outermost cells are going to be squamous. Your deeper cells are cuboidal. So when you're looking at stratified tissue, any tissue that has more than one layer, be careful not to look at the deeper cells, to try to describe the type of cell you're looking at, because the deeper cells are not going to give you the true picture of it. It's those outermost or most superficial cells that are going to give you the most distinction in what type of cell it is. So again, in stratified squamous epithelium, your outermost cells or your most superficial cells are going to appear squamous, whereas the deeper cells are going to appear cuboidal. But because the outermost cells are appearing squamous, these are going to be some stratified squamous epithelium. Even these are going to be considered stratified squamous epithelium because as they grow out toward the superficial side or toward the surface, and they will become more and more squamous. So new cells in this type of tissue is produced in these deeper layers, and they start pushing toward the surface. As they push toward the surface, they become more and more squamous. In stratified squamous epithelium, the outer layer of skin, so now we're actually talking about the outside of our bodies, our skin, is called epidermis. Epi meaning outside, dermis referring to the skin. So the epidermis is going to be keratinized, meaning that those outer layers of cells are going to have more and more amounts of keratin infused into those cells. Keratin is basically going to be a substance that helps to waterproof and protect those cell layers. So when we touch our skin, we are actually touching cells that have been keratinized, that have been filled with keratin so that our skin is waterproof. So cells that line the oral cavity, cells that line the vagina, cells that line the anal cavity, all of these are considered stratified squamous epithelium. All right. Now, in these areas, the outer layer is not keratinized. The keratinized cells are going to be on the outside of your skin, but it's not all locations where your simple squamous epithelium is located. Now, you also have stratified cuboidal. So stratified cuboidal means that you have 2 to 3 layers of cube-shaped cells. Of course, because you have more than one layer, you're going to get more protection than if you were to just have one layer. My apologies. So more protection than just one layer because you have 2 to 3 layers of cube-shaped cells. These are going to be cells that line the ducts of your mammary glands. So the glands that produce and secrete milk for the young are lined with stratified cuboidal epithelium. Your sweat glands lined with stratified cuboidal epithelium. And your salivary glands, as well as the glands of the pancreas that secrete things like insulin and glucagon. All of those glands, all of these ducts are going to be lined with simple cuboidal epithelium. So this first image, you have stratified squamous. So remember that one characteristic of epithelial tissue in general is a free surface and one surface connected by a basement membrane. So you have the free surface here. You have the layer connected by the basement membrane. It's stratified, so it's more than one layer. We can see lots and lots of layers here. I also mentioned that as you're looking at your stratified cells, you want to look at the surface cells or the more superficial cells for the official shape. These are going to be your squamous cells because as they push from the basement membrane toward the surface, they start to get thinner. Whereas those that are closer to the basement membrane look more like cubes. So we're not going to look at that to give us the description of the types of cells that we're talking about. Stratified squamous epithelium. Stratified cuboidal, 2 to 3 layers of cube-shaped cells. So you still have that free surface here, you still have that basement membrane there, and then you have your 2 to 3 layers of cells that are going to be your protection and line your glands or ducts. So here's another cross section of a gland or duct. Here's your lumen, your free surface of your cells, one layer of cuboidal cells, second layer of cuboidal cells. Stratified columnar epithelium. Actually, I will come to this in the next video. So we'll end here with stratified squamous and stratified cuboidal epithelium.